Imagine a fellow that came from a very, very poor family, very little background, and just overnight became a very important leader. One of the fear is that that fellow, it gets to his head, and as a result he can be a very arrogant. The Rambam tells us the best way to fight arrogancy is to think that today is my last day on earth. So therefore, if I have about, let's say, 16 hours to live, and tomorrow, God forbid, I'm not around, therefore it's really worth it. It's really worth for me to feel better than anyone else. Fighting arrogancy is the core of a lot of Musar movement literature, Hasidic literature, speaking about a person that fight against himself, against his arrogancy. In Hasidic literature it's called bitul hayesh. A person should not get to himself that because I'm, for example, a physician, or I have PhD, or I have a big title, or I'm a leader of a company, or I am in knowledge of 9 languages, or whatever it is, he or she should not get that to the head. It's a matter of fact that a friend of mine, they delayed his PhD. He's supposed to get his PhD in 2006, and someone on the dissertation committee delayed it. So he went to a rabbi, and he asked, and he said, if you commit yourself that it will never get to your brain, you will get it. So he committed himself, and shortly afterward he get the approval, and he was graduated the following year in 2007. The idea of fighting arrogancy is a core part of our study today, because today we going to deal with the law of commitments, of vow, of Nazirite. Someone committed himself not to, for example, not to shave, not to drink wine, etc. So, as a fellow, that one time he saw his reflection, and he saw how beautiful it is. That's early time before the era of mirrors, right? And he felt arrogant. He felt that people is going to look up at him because he's so beautiful, you know, like models, like those people that thinks that they have a beautiful face or body or whatever. So he committed himself to be Nazirite, to attack the Yetzer Hara, to attack this evil inclination, especially with arrogancy. Let me share with you a story I heard from a great Rabbi, Asher Kowalski. He's a Maggid Shiur of Daf Yomi. And he gave over a story of Rosh Yeshiva of Gur. Gur is a Hasidic sect in Israel. And it was a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Dr. Eisner. After he passed, sometimes in life, a lot of story discovered only after a person is no longer around. And the story goes that he was a Rosh Yeshiva. Rosh Yeshiva, you know, you were talking about Rosh Yeshiva that have basically thousands of students graduated from his yeshiva. In a regular day by day, it's at least 1,000 students. And this giant Torah scholar, he works as a cleaning person of Beis Midrash. How that happened? Listen to this. Was one of the graduate students wants to have a job as a rabbi of a shul, of a synagogue. that Torah scholar went to Rosh Hashiva and he said, you know, I'm married, I have family, I would like to be a rabbi of a shul. How do you get the job to a community that, number one, appreciate you, number two, pay you a nice salary in Israel? So Rabbi Dr. Eisner went to a shul far away, but still a nice community. He knew that they have no rabbi, and he said to them, they don't know who is he, they don't know that he is a Rosh Hashiva or anything. And he said, are you looking for someone to clean the shul? I'm willing to come at night before the sunrise, clean it, make it neat and smell good and looks good, but I need a monthly salary. In Israel they pay once a month. The Gaboim, everyone said fine. So for a long time, right, he did it. And meanwhile, he asked that fellow, he said to them that there's a rabbi that wants to apply the job, and they, you know, the typical shul, they always complain, there's no money, no money. So they hire him for no money. And he walks there, and the Rosh Hashiva paid him. And he didn't know that actually the Rosh Hashiva, the giant scholar, was no issue with his salary, you know, etc. He traveled every morning to that neighborhood, and he was there before the sunrise, and nobody knows him, nobody recognizes him, to clean the shul and to get a monthly salary so they can have a full-time rabbi. Right? It shows you the level of humbleness of a giant man like you. This, what we said in Pirkei Avot, remember we studied Pirkei Avot, the matter of anava, bitul hayesh, how a person can subjugate his evil inclination to serve Hashem properly. So we are on page 9. In this page we're going to deal first with the subject of vow versus nedava, which means voluntarily commitment. We're going to speak about the manner of vow, which is, remember yesterday we said it's better not to commit a vow than to commit and not to follow. On the other hand, we said that it's good to encourage a vow if you know that that's either avoid you from sinning or encourage you to do something that otherwise you will not do. So here we're going to deal with all these different definitions, when, where, and how one should commit himself to Neder, and when part of the Neder, part of the vow, it's ineffective, and when it's not. The Mishnah tells us, כנדרי רשעים נדר בנזיר ובקורבן ובשבועה. Meaning, we have a yad neder. You remember the handler? We said that yad, miktzat, part of the neder, it's considering as a neder. So the Mishnah here dealing with examples. Someone said like Nedarim of those who are wicked. What does that mean? In general, pious people, good, righteous people do not committed those type of vow. You should be careful. Remember we said always to the Gaboim, you should say bli neder, without making a vow. Because the moment you commit yourself, you're dealing with Hashem. You make a certain commitment, that's serious. So someone see a Nazirite man pass by him, and he said the same like those wicked, so it in a way part of the neder. So he said, since that Nazir, that Nazirite passed by him at that time, the Ran explained, so the moment is that he wanted to be a Nazirite, so it's like a manner of which he accepted the Nazirite upon himself. The same applies of the offering. If it was an animal, the front of him, and he said the same way, so it's already partially neder, and it's right? Accepted neder. Ubi shvu'ah, you see a loaf of bread in the front of him, and he said the same way as those wicked persons, because the Ran explained a normal person, I mean pious person, avoiding using this neder of shvu'ah, of oath. Now, on the other hand, Nidrei Reshaim lo amar klum. If he said like the vow of the ksherim, Nidrei ksherim lo amar klum. If like vow of these pious good people, so it's like he didn't say anything. Why? Because, as we said, the pious people don't make those vows. They don't commit themselves to be Nazirite, bringing offering, making all this oath. Kenidvotam, however, like all these virtues, those other pious people, and therefore he made it like a voluntarily, because the righteous people used to give a nedavot, used to give a contribution, accept upon themselves offering. Nadar benazir uve korban. So it's like someone who's become a Nazirite or an offering. So it's like accepted upon himself. So the Rishonim, the early rabbis said that wicked person does Mashe Balo, whatever he likes. Here, we're not dealing with this type of personality. We're dealing with Adam Kasher, a virtuous person, that his problem is only he keep making those commitments, keep making those vows. Do you know people like that? That they are good people, but it just easily, and the problem, I'm sorry to use this example, but you go to a board meeting, right? In some organizations, you see people who promise a lot, but then follow up. You go to the next meeting, he says, all right, so last meeting we said so and so, and you see some people just keep committing themselves to things but never follow up. So kasher, a virtuous person, avoid himself from all of this commitment because it's a serious business, right? Whatever, motzas fatecha tishmo. There is a book called Netivot HaMishpat, the Netivot, dealing with all the gidrei yad, the whole definition of partially. Here, if it's neder vadai, if it's a clear manner of vow, then yad mo'il, partially it's effective. For example, imagine if you have two witnesses. They saw someone who wrote a get, who wrote a bill of divorce to his wife. But then he said, no, I decided not to give her. All right? And later on, they find out that she's divorced. So they come up and they said, no, we saw him that he is basically regretted before he handed to her. That's called yad, right? It's a part. They didn't see the full action, the full. Is that effective or not? That's the Netivot HaMishpat. He dealt with that. So here you see all this situation that it's not 100% clear. And that's what we said so many times, how careful person should be with those type of expression, commitments, words. That's the story of Atarat Nedarim we have before Yom Tov, right? Before the high holidays. So the Gemara asks, since we are dealing only with the manner of which wicked people does, V'dilma hache ke'amar, you may say that he meant to say, Kenidrei reshaim lo nadarna, that like those matter of oath of these wicked people, I'm not vowing. So it means that it's not any manner of neder or vow. So why it's not taking an effect? Amar Shmuel, be'omer kenidrei reshaim, and he add to that, hareini, alai, heimenu, hareini binzirut, alai bekorban, heimenu bishvuah, which means again and again, you have yad, you have part of that. That's basically the Netivot point of view. Hareini binzirut, let's start with partially. Nezirite. Dilma hareini beta'anit ke'amar. As you know, we have a mincha prayer in the afternoon, a special section. If one committed himself to fast, right, as individual, so he makes a declaration the night before that tomorrow I'm going to take a fast day, right? That's a special section of prayer. One's having mincha. So if he doesn't, why the Mishnah did not mention that someone commit himself to that vow in the fast? Amar Shmuel k'shaya nazir over lefanav. Here you talk about specific situation that you have already a fellow that he is a nazir and he passed by him. So it means that you understand from partially manner of oath, since it was a Nazirite that passed through him, that he meant to say that he wanted specifically to be part of that. Even he didn't express it in a full statement. So therefore, he has chalot nezirut. He has already the effectiveness of being a Nazirite. So therefore, heimenu bishvu'ah, dilma heimenu de'achilna ka'amar. So if you talk about from him in the oath, so he meant to say that from it shall I eat. So the question is, how exactly, because it's such an ambiguous language, how you know that it's really not a yadayim she'ena mochichot, which means that it's unproof part of the oath. So Rabbi Akiva Iger and the Rosh said that it's very hard to impose upon him because it was such an ambiguous and yadayim she'ena mochichot. It's not total clear that he meant it. You see, that's the problem, because if it was a clear statement and lucid way, then it wasn't an issue. So the Gemara elaborated and clarified, said, you know what? Amar Rava de Amar heimenu shelo ochal. So here is a situation that, you know what he expressed? He said, well, the one who make the vow said, from it shall I not eat. So this is a clear. Why? Because the Ran explained at that time you have some food at the front of him. So it's clear that that's applied to that specific item that he has at the front of him. So why you need to say it? Since he didn't express in the word of oath out of his mouth, so therefore they come to teach us that this a partial declaration, a yad of all. So the yad neder keneder, partial declaration, is like a total declaration, because that was intent, and therefore you have a chalot neder, you have effectiveness of oath. The same applies in shvuah. So the late posek, that I have the privilege to know him very well, it was a Yerushalayim Dayan, great rabbi by the name of Fisher. So Rav Fisher had the responsa over someone who's fasts, but he didn't commit himself to fast. As we said, in the afternoon service, Mincha, we have a special declaration. I commit myself tomorrow to fast. So if you look carefully at the language in the prayer books, they said, I accept upon myself bli neder, without making a vow for the following day to fast, right? So the question is that effective or not? Because we call it a level of gradation, a madrigot, steps in the manner of neder, because there is a concept of nedava, which is a voluntarily act, and they have a neder, that it's a vow. Here, the question is, if he said in such a language without making a vow, it's like a huge difference than if you said making a vow. So one of the suggestions you have, and you see it from many rabbis that said the same thing, you see it from the Chidah, they say that nowadays people are weak, meaning people doesn't have the strength they used to have in the old ancient times. Today, unfortunately, the food that provided most of the people is full of chemicals. The food industries, I don't need to tell you how those ingredients with the food, so much, the generation is different. Things are different. So the rabbi suggested the best way to fast is to fast from speaking Lashon Hara. Ta'ani dibur, that a person guard his tongue. Meaning, for example, a person commit himself, if he wants to fast, that he said, Bli Neder, tomorrow I'll only pray, but every manner of speaking, I'll be extraordinary careful, either to the extreme, not to speak for an hour or a couple of hours, or to speak, but guard every word I said, should not be a Lashon Hara. That's, the rabbi said, is better fast than just physical not eating. But the all question is again and again, when you take this type of ta'anit, commitment of fast, the language is, if you said without making a vow, or you didn't specify it, or you said it's a vow, כנדרי כשרים, the Mishnah said, לא אמר כלום. Why? Because Adam kasher lo noder, a person that is virtuous, not make this vow. My Tana de Shanalei beneder lendavar. Who is the Tana, the rabbi in the Mishnah, that differentiate between the Neder, which is the vow, and Nedava, the voluntarily commitments. Leima, which is, again, people, righteous, virtuous people do not commit themselves to vow, but they voluntarily giving away either money or time, etc. Leima lo Rabbi Meir velo Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe neither the Mishnah follow those two rabbis, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, we learn in the book of Ecclesiastics, Kohelet, chapter 5, verses 3 and 4. Et asher tidor shalem. Whatever you make a vow, you have to pay it. And the Mishnah Berurah said right away. Meaning, if it's a holiday or Shabbat, and you commit yourself to give $100 to the synagogue or yeshiva or someone, so the moment the sun sets and it's over, write the check, right? Don't wait. But in general, tov asher lo tidor, it's better for a person not to make a vow, mishetidor velo teshalem, that you make this type of vow and you didn't follow up for all kind of reasons. So here, the text speaks about 3 different categories of people who are committed themselves to consecrated item, like offering to the Beit HaMikdash, but there are 3 different categories, which again, if you remember, we studied Pirkei Avot about people who give tzedakah, different level of people, said 3 types. 1, someone who commit himself, make this vow, and pay it. Noder umshalem, committed himself to vow and paid. Number 2, someone who avoid himself from any manner of vow. Eino noder klal. Number 3 is someone who commit himself but didn't follow up, right? Noder velo meshalem. He commit himself to pay something or to give something, then follow up. So for sure, someone who commit himself and don't follow up, that's worse. That's not a question, right? But the other 2, what is better? It's better not to commit yourself to anything, or to commit and the pay. Because again, the moment you commit yourself, it's not a joke. You commit yourself to something. So they said, Tov mizeh umizeh, she'eino noder kol ikar divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said, you know what? When it's all said and done, it's better not to commit yourself at all, because guess what? You commit himself. Imagine the Torah is open. You have a minyan there. someone is in need, right? The Torah scholar, yeshiva, synagogue, right? And you commit yourself to that money and you totally forget about it. That's serious, right? So therefore, don't go there. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, טוב מזה ומזה הנודר ומשלם. He says, no. The best is, no, commit yourself to a vow and follow up. Right? So, you do that. אפילו תימא רבי מאיר. Now, here's the big point that we have to learn. The Ritva and many others mentioned the famous Tosfot in Tractate Chulin. In the Torah portion of Vayetze, in the book of Genesis, book of Bereshit, the Torah tells us about our forefather Yaakov, Jacob. He left his parents' house. He was in a great fear. He doesn't know what's going to happen in the future. So it's a weird word they said there. Vayidar Yaakov Neder leimor. Jacob make a commitment, a vow, saying that if God will be with me and help me in the unknown place I'm going to be, he went to Laban, etc., etc., and return I will do so and so. I commit myself to bring an offering, take a tithe, etc. So the question they ask is, what is leimor? We always know in the Torah, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe leimor. God spoke to Moses saying, which means God spoke to Moses that he should speak to the children of Israel. But here Jacob is by himself, and Yaakov Avinu, he talked to Hashem. So what is leimor? So the Tosfot tells us in Tractate Chulin that it's teaching a message to a future generation. Sheyehu nodrim be'eit tzara, that his descendants, his future generation, in a time of great stress, in a time of crisis, they should make this commitment. Which again, we here differentiate between neder shelo be'et tzara, someone who make a vow not at time of stress, versus someone who make a vow at a time of stress. Yaakov is a good example that he was in a huge stress when he made that vow. Afilu teima Rabbi Meir, even you said that the Mishnah follow Rabbi Meir. 9b, ki ka'amar Rabbi Meir beneder, bin dava lo ke'amar. So the one said that the Meir specifically talk about vow, but not a gift offering. So the Gemara challenged that and said, va'akatane kenidvotam nadar benazir uve korban. But we learn in the Mishnah that one said like the gift offering of those ksherim, of those virtues, he has vowed with regard to becoming a Nazirite or bringing offering, so that a virtuous vow to become Nazirite and bring offering. So the Gemara said, today you have to learn the Mishnah in a way that Nadav ben Nazir uve korban, he has volunteered with regard to becoming Nazirite or bringing an offering. The rabbi said that one of the idea of making this type of nedava, a gift offering, a volunteer gift offering, you have a certain moment. The iron is hot, you know. A poor person comes to you and asks you for something. So at that very moment, you want to do it. Next day, 2 days, you cool off. And you may change your mind or change the size of donation. It's a famous story about the Rothschild. Was a righteous man, I assume you all heard. So one time a poor person came to him and he expressed his need, etc. Now Rothschild at that very moment didn't have cash on him. So he said, okay, he took off his golden watch, which was very expensive, and he gave it to him and he said, can you come this evening, I'll give you the donation. Come over this evening to my home and I'll give you a donation. And bring it back and I'll give you the donation. This is like temporarily, so you hold on that I mean to give you. So when he came home, the poor person gave him back the golden watch, and he gave him very nice size donation. So the family members asked him, why are you doing that? So he said, when the poor person talked to me, I wanted to give him, for example, $500. But I figured out maybe when he since I don't carry cash, maybe when he come to my house, I change my mind and give him 50 or 100 instead of 500. So in a way, I make a voluntarily gift, not a neder, but a voluntarily gift of my expensive watch. In that way, I knew that is some sort of serious commitment in both parties. He knows that I'm serious, I know I'm serious. So when he came back, I follow up. Okay? But again, you see here the huge difference between nedava, a gift, voluntarily gift offering, but not a neder. So the Gemara asks, Ma'ishna noder delo. What is the exceptionally different about making a vow that lead Rav to say that one should not do it? Dilma ateiva ba lidei takala. Maybe he is in violation that thou shall not delay it. As we said many times, one of the tricks the lawyers play always, right? What did they say? Postpone it. Come next week. Come tomorrow. Right? That's sometimes people do. I forgot. I don't have cash. I can't do it now, etc. So here, nedava nami lo. Dilma ate belidei takala. So maybe in a manner of voluntarily gift offering, who should not be made because maybe it's a serious concern that the person will come to sin through it, because even he's sanctified immediately, maybe he delayed from do it, for example, offering, and then he will be in violation of thou shall not delay bal te'acher. So the Gemara said, here is an example. Kehilel HaZaken, it was an elderly, great, pious man, leader of the community, his name is Hillel, that the Tanya Amru al Hillel HaZaken shelo ma'al adam be'olato kol yamav, that a person never reach a point of violation of a burnt offering after it was consecrated. How? Mevi'ah kshehi chulin la'azara. Hillel will always bring his offering to the temple courtyard while it was yet unconsecrated. So the Ran explained that he didn't put it inside the courtyard, it was the petach, the entrance of the courtyard. And Tosfot said that it was nedava, not neder, that was a voluntarily gift offering. Umakdisha, and then he sanctified it. Vesomech alea veshochata, he placed the hands upon it, and then he shoichet is slaughter it, right? That's the way the pious people does. So the Ritva said that it's a general idea that when it's come to a hekdesh, when it's come to a charity fund, etc., if you have gaba'ei tzedakah, if you know that people go after that person and keep nudging him, keep putting pressure on him, said, you know, you commit yourself, etc., etc., we are waiting, we need your money, etc. So that's not the issue. Because if it's a structure toward people who already follow up, okay, so that's different. The rabbis elaborate and said, you know, we have a yizkor, hazkarat neshamot, that people commit themselves. So it's good for the deceased. We believe that the soul, in a way, have aliyah, uplifted the soul, but also for the living. Why? Because imagine Yamim Noraim, the days that the heavenly tribunal make decision who shall live, who shall die, how is the year is going to be, etc., etc. So this is a good time also for the living to commit themselves to give a tzedakah extraordinary, so they secure themselves for a good year. So again, that's the Ritva said, as long as the gaba'ei tzedakah, people who are in charge for the charity fund, are familiar, So it's okay to do that, to make this commitment. Hanicha nedavad the korbanot. We understand when it's a voluntarily gift offering, when it's come to sacrificial offering. But nedavad din zirut ma'ika lemeimar. If someone committed himself to voluntarily give money for the Nezirah, so meaning someone accept upon himself to be a Nezirite, and virtuous people avoid himself from doing that. Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, you remember the Mishnayot in Ethics, the first chapter, it's talk about righteous Shimon, that he was among the high priests, and he was the beginning of the era of Second Temple. He served as the high priest for 40 years, that's Gemarrah in Yoma 39, and he was the late people from the men of the Great Assembly. So he, the Tanya, Amar Shimon HaTzadik, Miyamai lo achalti asham nazir tameh. He said, I never ate from the guilt offering of Nazir who become ritually rendered impure, which means that after he purified and he needs to recount the days of the Nazirite. Ela echad, it was one person that I count that he's totally did it for the sake of heaven. This is a fascinating story. פעם אחת בא אדם אחד נזיר מן הדרום. A Nazirite came to me from the south. The Marsha said, הרוצה להחכים ידרים. Someone wants to get wise, go south. So he was contaminated when he was Nazirite, so he purified and he brought his offering. וראיתיו שהוא יפה עיניים וטוב רואי וקבוצותיו סדורות לו טלטלים. I noticed that he is exceptionally beautiful. He has these beautiful eyes, beautiful face, and beautiful, what it says, curls around his... אמרתי לו, בני, מה ראית להשחית את שכרך זה הנאה? Why you commit yourself to Nazirite and then you take away all this beautiful hair? אמר לי, רואה הייתי לאבא בעירי. I was a shepherd for my father. הלכתי למלות מים מן המעיין. I went to draw water from the spring. ונסתכלתי בבבואה שלי, and I look at my reflection in the water, right? So then I noticed how beautiful I am. So Mayor Eric explained that it's a big question to look at the mirror. It's a question, halakha, it's okay, it's not okay, when a person can look, not look. In general, there is the issue of some type of manner of which men not do the same manner of women. The Torah said it. So the question is, here we say that it's not a mirror, it's a reflection. Anyway, upachaz ala yitzri, and my yetzer hara, my evil inclination, quickly overcame me. So ubikesh letordani min haolam, and he sought to expel me from the world. Why? Because guess what happened? When it gets to your head, you become a very lust-oriented person. You are full of yourself, and you think how beautiful I am, and how beautiful everyone look at me and says, oh, look how handsome is he, or how attractive is she, etc. So people, it gets to the person's brain, and when it gets to the brain, then he can do a lot of things that's very foolish. As we said, the Rambam tells us a person should remember that God can take it back in a second, in so many different ways. So amarti lo, so I said to my inner evil inclination, rasha, wicked, lama ata mitgae ba'olam she'eno shelcha? Why you are arrogant over a world that it's not yours? B'mi she'hu atid liyot rima v'tole'a, for this body that in a matter of short time you're going to be eaten like maggots and and worms, which means that the moment you bury the body, shortly afterward, it decayed and the only bones left, right? So for this you are arrogant. The Khatam Sofer said that that's based on what we study in Pirkei Avot in ethics. Tikvat enosh rima. If you look at the body part, the moment the person is gone, it's over. So therefore, he wanted to subjugate his nefesh behemit, his yetzer hara, ha'avodah. That was the manner of which they commit themselves a vow in those days. He said, sha'agalechacha lashamayim, that he wanted to subjugate himself by shaving his hair, and he accepted upon himself to be a Nazir, the Rosh said, in order to fulfill another mitzvah, which is the taking away the hair at the end. So it means that he was sincere for the sake of heaven. Miyad amadti unshaktiv al rosho ve'amarti lo. I stood up and I kissed his head and I said to him, Bni, my son, kamocha yirbu nodrei nezirut b'Yisrael. May many people follow this way that you commit yourself to be Nazir, many of Israel. Alecha katuv omer, that's exactly what the sentence in the Torah, in the book of Numbers chapter 6, verse 2 said, Ish ki afli lindor neder nazir le'azir la'Hashem. A man who shall dissociate himself by vowing a neder as a nazir to abstain for the sake of God. Which means that it's all for the sake of heaven, and therefore it's a great mitzvah, and it's befitting to eat from that offering. That means the Rosh said, Kadosh is holy. So, again, this is an exceptionally different story, that someone is very sincere, and he did it to avoid himself from sins, and that's nidvat ksherim, that's the proper one. So now, we stop the discussion and we're going to deal with the word what Shimon HaTzadik said. Matkif la Rabbi Mani, ma yishna Hasham Nazir tamed lo achal. Why you say that this is a exceptional situation that Shimon HaTzadik did not eat the guilt offering? The atei al chet, because it come to atone for sin of rending ritual impurity, and it's inappropriate for an important person to eat from an offering that originated with the sin. Kol ashamot name lo lechut de'al chet kamu de'al chet atu, that maybe it should have not eaten any other guilt offering either, because they are all come on account of transgressions. Amar le Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Yonah said, Shimon HaTzadik avoided himself to eat from that guilt offering not because it's originated in transgressions. Hainu ta'ama kshehen tohin nozrin, kshehen metam'in verabin alehen yemei nezirut, מתחרטים בהם ונמצאו מביאים חולין לעזרה. So originally they are very enthusiastic. Then they later, when they became contaminated with the corpse, and is it too many days of Nazirite, so they backed out, and ונמצאו מביאים חולין לעזרה, and they are found to be bringing unconsecrated animals to the courtyard to be offered. So Rabbi Mani responded to him and said, if that's the case, afilu nazir tahor nami. So if that's the case, Shimon HaTzadik should have abstained from eating even the offering of ritually pure Nazirite as well, for the same reason. Why? Perhaps he too regretted this decision to become a Nazirite. So Rabbi Yonah responds and he said, Nazir tahor lo, offering of a pure Nazir is not considered unworthy. Da'amudei amid nafshei deyachol lindo, because he surely assured himself before making this vow that he was able to make a vow and follow up and fulfill it. So it means that it was a very serious decision, and only when this term was extended beyond the time, beyond the duration that this person who make a vow initially intended, is the reason to be concerned that he regretted his vow. So I would like to conclude with several practical halachot with this, because as you see today, the discussion involved in the many halachot with Nedarim and Nedavot. Here are some halachot. First, it's the well-known Rambam in Ilchot HaKorbanot, chapter 14. If one declares that he accepts an obligation upon himself, like the vow of the wicked, so it's binding statement. If one declares that he accepts an obligation upon himself, like the vow of the virtuous, or even said, this loaf, this bread is konam for me, like a vows of the virtuous. So it's, again, that's different, because virtuous people not making this vow, so it's not binding. Now, here you see the notion that we say that a person should not make a neder. That's Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 203 said, one should be careful not to take any vows, even for the purpose of charity. It's preferable not to volunteer a donation by employing the language of vow, because the moment you express it in words, then it's very hard to back out. But again, as we said, there are an exception, like the story of this fellow with the beautiful face, and that's what's the conclusion. The Rambam said in Talmud Nedarim, chapter 13, he said, one who vows to become a Nazirite due to pure intentions is pursuing the service of God, and is considering praiseworthy. So that's what we said in the Bamidbar. The verse referred to individual who states, his concentration to God is upon his head. He is even equated to a prophet, as it's stated in Amos chapter 2, and I raise up of you sons of prophets, and of you young men for Nazirite. So again, that's something that is praiseworthy, but again, it's only the exceptions.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai